Podium, Vice President Michelle McGovern, Secretary-Treasurer Tony Perosi, past President Tom McCarthy, and the Reverend Bob Norris. It's been a rough 2 weeks for journalists. What with the 6-month suspension of Brian Williams from NBC and the sudden deaths of CBS Bob Simon and New York Times media critic David Carr, veteran journalists seem to be becoming a rare breed. We are fortunate to have two of the finest with us today. Together, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski co-host Morning Joe on MSNBC, which features interviews with top newsmakers and in-depth analysis of the day's biggest events. The New York Times has ranked Morning Joe as one of today's top morning news shows. We look forward to their remarks and off-the-cuff commentary, often disagreeing with each other, that has made their show so wildly popular. As many of you know, Joe Scarborough has Florida roots. He graduated from Pensacola High School and the University of Florida Law School. And he is a former, I knew that would get something. And he is a former Republican congressman from Florida. He is also a 2-time New York Times best-selling author. Unfortunately, Joe and Mika's schedule doesn't allow for a book signing today, but Joe's latest book is How the Right Path, From Ike to Reagan, How Republicans Once Mastered Politics and Can Again. Joe last addressed the Forum Club in 2005, and a lot has gone on in the past decade. Joe's co-host, Mika Brzezinski, has been in broadcast journalism since 1990, has worked for all three networks as a reporter, morning anchor, and contributor to such shows as CBS Sunday Morning and 60 Minutes. She was the ground zero reporter for CBS and was broadcasting live when the South Tower collapsed. Prior to joining MSNBC in 2007, Mika was an anchor of a CBS Evening News Weekend edition and a CBS News correspondent. She is the author of 3 best-selling books, including Knowing Your Value, which examines the role of women in the workplace, and she has a new book coming out in May called Grow Your Value. And I'm sure politics was in her blood at an early age, as she is the daughter of foreign policy expert and former National Security Director Zbigniew Brzezinski. Vanity Fair named both Scarborough and Brzezinski to their 2012 list of top media power players. The same year, Scarborough was named to the prestigious Time 100 list of the world's most influential people. It's time to see now who comes out on top when it comes to talking about which side has the right answers, the Republicans or the Democrats. Join me now in welcoming Joe and Mika.
Here? Can I?
Yep,
can I
that's
go
it right there.
Hey, sure.
Get on your
Sure.
side.
All right. It is, let me tell you something. It is great to be here.
Yeah,
And, you know,
yeah.
it is so good to see your smiling faces.
Yeah, that's
It
good.
is so good to have Southern hospitality,
Mm-hmm.
but I've got to tell you the truth. Mainly, it's really, really good to be out of -5 degree
It's
weather.
damn cold where we
It
are.
is freezing.
It's cold here, but we'll take it.
It's not cold here.
It's not that bad.
By the way, you know what you call the weather pattern you're having right now, like in Palm Beach? July, up in New York. So we thank you so much for having us. I want to, there are a lot of people for us to say hi to really quickly. One is Mark Foley. Mark is a guy that came with me in 1994. And I know, Mark, you were feeling it along with me, and I mean this. When there were candidates that were running and elected officials that were running, it's such a grueling, tough process, and I've always said that every American should run for office once, just to understand how tough the process is, but how rewarding it is, too. It's great to serve this country. And also,
Table 67, Lisa Myers.
Lisa Myers, NBC News.
I think it's right there in the front. I can't believe it. I'm in the same room with my daughter, Carly.
Oh, my gosh.
Who's here with her friend Delia and my friend Marianne.
She's a
It's
tough
always
critic, I'm
nice.
sure.
And Yvette Miley's sister, where are you? Stand up. Biggest Morning Joe fan ever. Where are you? Where are you? Where? Ah!
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Okay, now she's going to kill me. All right.
Yvette's sister is
She
vice
said, "Make a
president
fuss over my
at
sister."
MSNBC and said her sister had been tracking her down for the past 3 weeks to get here. So thank
We
you for
are
coming.
here.
Yeah.
And what we like to do, usually Joe likes to sort of launch into things and just start blurting stuff
Blah,
out, but I
blah,
like
blah.
to take my time and get to know the audience and just ask a few questions so we get a lay of the land. So can we do that, Joe?
Yes.
How many Republicans in the room? Raise your hand.
All
Wow.
right.
I knew it.
I think it is fair to say I have not been around this many Republicans since I started working at MSNBC.
I'm getting hives. Okay.
And by the way, my fellow Republicans, the official network of the Republican Party, MSNBC, says hello, as does Reverend Sharpton.
Okay. How many Democrats in the room? Hello.
Oh, good. This is a good split.
This is a perfect, any independents? How about Republicans who voted for Obama? Don't raise your hand.
I wouldn't admit it.
You
You know,
used to
we-
be so cool.
We used to ask this question in 2008, and everybody would, I did it.
I'm
And
a Republican.
They thought they were so cool. Now it's like
Not
wearing
cool.
a polyester leisure
It's
suit.
bad.
Very few Republicans
Just don't
admit
raise your.
to it.
How many Morning Joe viewers? Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So this is a lot like our audience. You know, it's a diverse audience. We have Republicans, Democrats, and independents watching, and it's a lot like Mika and me, and we try to bring that to the show. And we have varied backgrounds. Mika, of course, was a liberal raised in the Northeast, and I was a conservative raised in the Deep South. Mika's dad, of course, ran U.S. foreign policy for 4 years. That's pretty good. My dad ran Little League baseball
Aw,
teams for
George
4
is the
years.
best. That's awesome.
And I was raised in a variety of Southern Baptist churches across the Deep South, and Mika was raised in a variety of
Catholic.
young Marxist League
Now
meeting
stop.
houses in Manhattan.
It's
So
funny.
variety is really the
I do
spice
have a
of life.
microphone here. We're very different. We are. But that's actually what makes our show good. We kind of bring different points of view to the table, and we duke it out in a really civil, fun, joyful way. But we found early on, and I think this might be the key to the show's success, we found one fundamental thing that we have in common.
Our parents are crazy.
Totally. They're mean, too.
Yeah.
Crazy and mean.
Yeah, and I was going to say that, Mika. Not only crazy, but extraordinarily mean. And I didn't realize how mean Mika's parents were until the show
Awful.
started. And I said to Mika, I said, you know, we're kind of having a hard time booking people. Let's book your dad. I mean, you ran U.S. foreign policy, Middle East peace accords. That ain't bad. Mika said, don't do it.
No way.
I said, no, let's do it. And she said, you can't handle him, okay? He's a very mean guy. I said, I'm a Southern politician.
Oh, God.
I can handle it. I feel your pain. I mean, I get this thing down, right? So I invite him on the show. He comes on, and I
right
don't
in
know what
between.
went over me that day, but I decided I was going to lecture Dr. Brzezinski on Middle East peace. Now, this is the guy, of course, who was the architect of the Camp David Accords. And so after lecturing for about 5 minutes, he looked at me and he said, you know, you were stunningly superficial.
Yep.
Mika slid under the table. I was beat red. I was ready to go after him.
I was actually relieved because in my family, that's love. It was affection.
Mika said that was affection in her family. I said, I don't need that kind of affection. It's going to be viral on YouTube in 10 minutes. And it was. But I found out that that really was affection in the family. I met her brother, Ian Brzezinski, he's the resident Republican in the Brzezinski family. He's a neocon. I mean,
Totally.
he's over the top.
Black sheep.
Give this guy like 3 tanks and he'll invade Canada. He's a neocon's neocon. So I'm meeting Ian at Tim Russard's place right after the show starts. And I said, you know, I got to say this, Ian. I've been around a lot of smart people. Your sister intuitively knows people better than anybody I've ever met. She's extraordinarily generous. And then he cut me off. He said, you know, Mika had the lowest SAT score in the history of Williams College. And I said, what an SOB.
I did.
They're all mean. And then I met Mika's mom about 6 months later at the end of Mika's first book tour, All Things at Once, which Mika dedicated the book to her mom. We
She
came back to
hated it.
D.C. We thought it was like going to be a swan song. And so I invited Mrs. Brzezinski up. I said, Mrs. Brzezinski, come on up and tell us something about Mika that we don't know on this special, special evening. She's a crazy Czechoslovakian artist, by the way. And she gets a microphone. She says, let me see. Let me see. You know, Mika had the lowest SAT score in the history of Williams College.
They have never gotten over that. It just, you know,
What is
very-
with your
they're mean.
family?
I tried to tell you. And quite frankly, I thought, you know, my parents actually met their match with your parents.
Well, but the thing is, though, you actually did have some very positive things happening to you because you were a Brzezinski.
There were benefits. You had no benefits.
No, there were benefits. Like, for instance, as David Letterman likes to say, after you went on his show and you said that you had Deng Xiaoping over for dinner, he said, I bet that tasted great. But talk about when there was an opening in U.S.-Chinese relations for the first time ever in 1978.
Hopeful times.
The leader of China came to their house. Now, let me just say, I'm just curious. How many people had the leader of China over to their house? Okay, this is pretty rarefied air. How did that go?
Not well. Nothing in
Why
our
not?
house ever did, actually, because we did everything ourselves. My mother and father moved to McLean and got an old farmhouse and literally grew their crops, had chickens laying eggs, shot deer to eat for dinner. We lived like we were hillbillies in McLean, Virginia, and they decided to have a state dinner not at the White House, but at our house. And we were all so nervous that we didn't open the flue. The house got smoked out right before everyone arrived. My mom opened champagne and hit my dad in the eye. He got a black eye. And I was this 12-year-old awkwardly passing out caviar, and I tripped, and I spilled it right on Deng Xiaoping's crotch.
Okay, now, so here's the deal, okay,
That's
friends?
bad.
We have some students, raise your hands,
Yes,
okay?
kids.
Okay, kids. Okay,
Hi,
when
kids.
things go bad, sometimes you just need to know when to stop,
Walk
okay?
away. Just
like, for
walk
instance,
away.
if you're Rudy Giuliani and you say something
Shut up.
really stupid, at some point, if you
up.
say, I really shouldn't say this, then don't say it, okay?
Yeah.
In this case,
Yeah.
if you ever happen to have the leader of a country that has well over 1 billion people, like, inside their country,
Yeah.
and you spill caviar
Yeah.
on their crotch, just up there and walk away.
That's a good one, Joe.
Okay, just walk away.
good one.
Okay. What did you do, Mika?
I nervously lurched forward and began to wipe it off.
Yes, rubbed Deng Xiaoping's crotch. Can I say the low point in U.S.-Sino relations other than Tiananmen Square?
That's,
Good job, Mika.
I was a kid.
You also had the Pope. That's
met the
big. The
Pope.
Polish Pope.
John Paul II, we came to America and we actually had dinner at the very last minute at the British Embassy with the Pope, and that went badly as well.
Why's that?
Because my brother didn't want to go, the neocon,
Republican,
wanted to
of
go to the
course.
Langley High School football game instead. We had to drag him there. He wore ripped jeans, open Timberland boots, and a scowl on his face. And my mother, because we have such a diverse family, we are urged to express our views and debate them over dinner. And my mother sat down next to the Pope and decided to do that about birth control and the role of women in the Catholic Church. And my father was the one sliding under the table that night.
You know, the motto of your esteemed club is stimulate thought, promote dialogue. There are some times you can take that too far.
Yes.
And Mrs. Brzezinski took it too far with the Pope.
She sure does.
But they do that.
We did that all the time, and that was sort of the joy of our family, and we had lots of mishaps, but they were tough. We were tough on each other. And actually, you know, to take it to your parents, your first foray into politics is the perfect example of just how tough your parents could be too.
Yeah, it really was. As you guys, some of you know, I'm from Northwest Florida. It's a redneck Riviera, also known as L.A., Lower Alabama. AA, America's Albania. There are a lot of names for it. But I decided I was going to run in 1994 for Congress, which is exciting enough if you're 29 years old, but if you have no money, no name ID, no nothing, and you don't know anybody in politics, it's kind of a stupid thing to do. especially if you're from a district that hadn't elected a Republican since 1873. And we hung the last one we sent up there. So I went and told my mom and dad I was going to run against Earl Hutto, a good old boy, a Democrat. And I was doing it for one reason and one reason alone: Bill Clinton. I couldn't stand the guy. I'd see him on TV and be like, "Oh, I feel your pain." I'd be like, "He's lying. That's not what he's feeling. He's an awful guy." So I went in and I told my parents I was going to run against Earl Hutto because I wanted to stop Bill Clinton. And I thought they'd be so excited because, friends, my parents are so conservative. They still think Nixon was framed.
They do.
I still get
Today.
nasty emails anytime I criticize Sarah Palin or Glenn Beck or Argentina fascists. I mean, they're very conservative. So I tell my mom and dad, I'm running against Hutto. And my dad goes, "Well, that's great, Joey, but I'm voting for Earl."
Who does that? Who doesn't
does
vote for
that?
their son?
I got my mom's vote, thank God. And I went around and I campaigned. I ended up getting 62% of the vote, and I showed up in Washington, D.C., along with Mark and a lot of other Republicans, and we wanted to change the world. But unfortunately, before you did that, the first thing you had to do was go meet the president. And I didn't want to do it. Rachel is here, and of course, Rachel Campbell was my first chief of staff at 24. She's 29 now.
Exactly.
It's amazing how that works
doing?
with her. But I said, "Rachel, I'm not going." She said, "You got to go see the president." I said, "I can't do it." But I ended up going. Rachel won that battle, and there I was in the East Room, and I'm walking up to meet the guy, and I don't know how many of you have met Bill Clinton.
Oh, all of them have.
Probably all of you.
Yeah.
Like, you ask that of most presidents, and maybe 2 or 3 people in the room raise their hand. Bill Clinton, it's half the room.
Yeah.
I mean, he's like you too. It's like a Beach Boys song. He gets around. Everybody's met this guy. So as you know, the first time you meet him, he looks like he's 8 feet tall. He looks like Mutombo on those Geico ads. And he's like, his arms are, "I love you and I love you." He's like an octopus, you know, it's crazy. So I see him, and I'm so ticked off. I can't stand this guy. And I stop and look at him, and he looks at me. Remember this till the day I die. "Hey, it's Joe Scarborough." I was so mad. I turned around to my wife, and I was shaking. And I said, "He knows my name. The president knows me." And he came over, and he was like hugging me. And I mean, it's like he's Bill Clinton. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. He says his hands are all over you. And you're just like, God, it's unbelievable, I swear. And my friends, I testify to you, I was seduced.
Oh.
Monica had nothing on me that night.
Stop.
I fell in love. I fell in love with him. He was incredible. Of course, later that night, I went home and I was like Lady Macbeth trying to wash my hands. You know, I get the stain out. It wouldn't come. I came to a couple weeks later, and Erskine Bowles, his chief of staff, called me up, and he said, "Congressman, you're being kind of tough on my boss." I said, "Erskine, I love you, man. We're good friends. But I feel really bad about it as a Baptist. I can't stand your boss." He said, "Don't worry about it, Congressman. He hates you too." And he did. And Hillary did.
Oh, come on.
Their dog did.
You know what's funny about this is you should see them today. Seriously, we go every year to do the show at the Clinton Global Initiative, and Joe walks in the room talking, and Bill Clinton walks in the room, he's talking, and then they see each other, and their eyes lock, and it's, "Oh, Joe, you've got the best television show ever, and oh, Mr. President, you're the best president. Oh, Joe, your hair's so great, it's almost as good as mine.
My fellow
Let's
Republicans,
look in
this
the
is a
mirror
lie.
together because we're just so both great. We're awesome. Aren't you awesome?" And the two of you are like in love.
That is just not true.
It's disgusting. You could, after what happened between you two, like impeachment.
Well, it was the 1990s. It seemed like the thing to do. But anyway, we were actually on the show. David Axelrod, who's a friend of ours, actually emailed furiously from the White House. He said, "Excuse me, if you guys can break up the love fest for a second, you did impeach him." And Bill Clinton actually said, I showed him the email, Bill Clinton laughed and actually talked about it and said, yeah, how incredible that is the case, but we kept talking to each other. And we did, and think about the fact that in the 1990s you had a Republican House and Senate that couldn't stand a Democratic president. You had a Democratic president that couldn't stand the Republican Congress, and what happened? We balanced a budget for the first time in a generation. We balanced it 4 years in a row for the first time since the 1920s. We passed welfare reform. We cut taxes. We cut capital gains taxes. We extended the life of Medicare for 7 years when the Medicare trustee said it was going bankrupt. And we figured out a way to put our country ahead of our political party, even when we were fighting. And that just doesn't happen anymore, unfortunately. And Mika, that's something also that you learned growing up in your house with your father.
It's something that I feel Washington has lost. I think social media and real changes in the media world have added to this in a very destructive way. But when I was growing up, Republicans and Democrats not only converged at our house to break bread and to talk and to disagree and learn about each other, but my dad's staff on the National Security Council, we had a surprise birthday party for him a few years ago, and the people who walked in the door, it was striking to me just how diverse, from Condoleezza Rice to Madeleine Albright to Bob Gates to General Odom. There was not a fear of people who disagreed with one another that we see now. And I also think the one other change that has led to sort of the alienation that we see in Washington today is everybody goes home and they often operate remotely, and they operate through social media, through websites, through the media, instead of in person, and their children don't interact. I can't tell you how many presidents and vice presidents and secretaries of state's kids that I played with, and then the parents interacted, whether it be at Camp David or my house or someone else's home in Washington. That, Joe, was the norm.
It's not the norm anymore. Starting in 1994, Mark can tell you, and J.D. Hayworth, who I hear is here as well, can tell you, we came to Washington, D.C., we did the last vote, we rushed to the airport, we ran home, we held town hall meetings at home, we did constituency services, which is great. But what we didn't do is get to know the people that we worked with every day. And that's why it became so much easier for the insults to fly. And now that we're consumed by social media and we're consumed by Twitter and we're consumed by a 24/7 news culture, sometimes it's awfully hard to dial it back. And both sides have run to their respective corners. And that just can't be the case anymore. We're facing so many challenges as a country. We're facing a massive debt. It's only going to get worse. It's a debt that we're passing on to the next generation. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, the middle class is getting squeezed. And when it comes to foreign policy, turn on your TV set. We really need Republicans and Democrats working together on battling ISIS. We really need President Obama and the Republican Congress to speak with one voice when we speak out against Vladimir Putin. We really need our leaders to put the United States of America before their next election or their next political party fundraiser. And you know, while that sounds like an empty platitude in 2015, that's how this country ran for over 225 years. I talked about how Bill Clinton and the Republican Congress could get along. Well, in the 1980s, it was Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan that figured out a way to get along, even though Tip O'Neill's son said, my dad hated everything that Republican Ronald Reagan stood for. But he said, you know what he hated more? Gridlock in Washington. Getting nothing done. So Reagan and O'Neill would sit down that talk to each other, that do what Irish politicians have done for centuries now when they get together late at night. Drink whiskey, yes, that's right. Tell tall tales and not make it personal. And I'm always slammed online when I talk about the need for both parties getting along. People go, it's not a country club. Well, no, it's not a country club. But how would your business work if you were always screaming at the person in the next cubicle over or the next office over? You know, there was a biography of Ronald Reagan by Richard Reeves, and talked about the low point of Ronald Reagan's presidency. It was when the Marines were blown up, 240 Marines killed in 1983. Ronald Reagan called it the lowest moment of his time in public office. And that morning, Tip O'Neill, who had been warning against involvement in Lebanon and the Middle East, called all of his Democrats back to the Capitol to have an emergency meeting. And they all knew why they were going, because Tip O'Neill was going to talk about their strategy moving forward against the Republicans. Instead, what they got was a speaker that was as tough as could be, who went up to the microphone and he said, ladies and gentlemen, today, we're not Democrats. Today, we're not Republicans. Today, we're Americans. And Reeves went on to write, if anybody in this room criticizes the commander-in-chief at this stage in America's history, you won't have Ronnie Reagan to answer to. You'll have me to answer to. And you don't want to have me to answer to. And with that, Tip walked out of the room, and with that, all the Democrats got the message. 2 weeks later, the speaker and the president spoke on the phone, decided it was time to have a hard, tough debate. After all the Marines had been brought home, after they'd been buried, and after a 2-week period of mourning had begun. And they figured out how to put their country first. It's something we knew how to do for 225 years, and it's something we need to relearn. Thank you guys for having us.
Thank you.
We'll answer questions now.
Absolutely. Good. No. Yeah, no.
By the way, in this part of the presentation, Mika is going to be singing the answers to
No,
your
actually,
questions.
I won't.
If anybody else has other questions you have written down, just wave it in the air and one of our volunteers will come and pick it up. And our first questions always come from the students. So if you would stand, say your name and your school, and ask your question.
I'm Joshua Anderson from John I. Leonard High School. Our representatives consist of students in the finance, computer, and medical academies, as well as some that are in our journalism program. We would like to know what you feel the pros and cons are to the free and accessible community college plan as outlined by President Obama in his State of the Union address.
Mika loves it, and she will tell you why right now.
I think it's fantastic, and I think he's trying to get America working on a number of different levels. The bigger problem, in my opinion, is how much college overall is costing America's students. And the amount of debt that they walk out of the door when they go to a 4-year college is ridiculous. And some of them are paying up to 9% interest. And I look to leaders